Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Mama Cat, and I see that you're here. So I figure you want me to tell you a story. Why don't you go sit down and get cozy and relax as I tell you this story? Now, this story, before I begin, I want to say that my favorite author is one of my favorite authors is Charles de Lint, the Canadian writer. And in one of his books, The Onion Girl, he says, there are times when people need stories more than they need nourishment because the stories feed something deeper than the needs of the body. Well, I feel like these are times when we do need something deeper to nourish us. And I think that there are ancient stories that can help us how to deal with these trying, changing times in our lives. So I picked out lots of wonderful stories that I will tell you in the future. Stories that speak to your soul and stories that if you listen and use your imagination can really change your lives. But tonight I'm going to, in honor of New Year's Eve, I'm going to tell you a story about time and changes, about the challenges that we have to face in life, about staying true to your word, and about learning to live without fear. It's an Arthurian story set during the magical days between Christmas and Twelfth Night. It's called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And I've taken this condensed version from our J.R.R. Tolkien's translation of this wonderful, wonderful story. It was New Year's Eve when the old year takes to its deathbed and life, having passed through its longest night, begins to disentangle itself from the grip of wintry death. It was during that spell between the feasts of Christmas and Epiphany, when ghosts and specters are supposed to be abroad, that the Green Knight made his unheralded appearance at King Arthur's court. Now, King Arthur lay at Camelot that Christmas tide, together with the knights of the Round Table and many a lovely lady, amid merriment unmatched and mirth without care. The knights engaged in tournaments and then after came to the hall to play at carols. There was an unfailing feast for a full 15 days, with all the meat and mirth that men could devise. Gladness and gaiety by day and dancing by night, and all happiness that could be imagined in the hall and in the bowers, had those knights most renowned and ladies most lovely and king most courteous and noble. For it was the beginning of Arthur's reign, and under heaven his court was first in fame, and he was king over them all. Now on New Year's Eve, the king and his people came from chapel to the bright hall, and with cries of Noel, Noel, they handed out gifts to one and all. They made much merriment until their meat was served, and then they went to their places at the table. Queen Guinevere the Gay sat gracefully at the table under a costly canopy, certainly the loveliest lady there. And Sir Gawain, Arthur's sister's son, sat at her left hand. But Arthur would not eat until all were served, for he was still young enough to look forward eagerly to his custom of not eating at a high festival until some strange story or stirring adventure, some challenge or marvel had been made known. Well, the pipes and drums announced the beginning of that feast, and you cannot imagine how many delicious dishes were placed before them. But no sooner had the music stopped than a new noise suddenly drew near, and there, through the doorways, passed a perilous horseman, the mightiest in Middle Earth in height, a veritable giant, and yet well made. His face had a noble cast, although the most amazing thing about it was that it was green. He was all green, like a man from fairy. Both his skin and his clothes, his hair and his horse were a glowing green. Very happy he was there with a glint in his eyes, his green beard spread out over his broad chest, his green hair hung down to his elbows, and his horse was just as big and just as green, with golden bells interwoven through its mane. No one had ever beheld such a man nor mount, and there was no one there who would willingly test his might against this man's blow. But he wore no armor, but in one hand held a holly bundle, and in the other an old-fashioned axe, all of green steel and beaten gold. The edge was razor sharp, and the stem was a stout staff with costly braidings hanging from it. So he continued on into the hall, showing no fear and giving no greetings, except, now where is the governor of this gathering? For gladly I will set my sight on him and speak with him. And then he swung his gaze around to see who stepped forward to greet him. Now everyone sat stone still in that hall, as if they had all dropped into a dream, wondering who such a creature could be. And then Arthur fearlessly saluted him, saying, Lord, to this household you are welcome. I am head of all this court. Arthur is my name. Now come, sit with us and eat, and presently tell us what your wish might be. But the strange horseman replied, no, thank you. I haven't come to pass the time, but I have heard your praises sung in those of these knights. This is why I have come. Now I bear this holly bundle, so that you may know I come in peace, although I have left my sword and armor at the door as proof of my word. I crave no combat, but something different. If you are as bold as I have heard, you'll grant by your goodness the game I ask for. Now Arthur assured him that if he desired battle, he would find it there. But the Green Knight laughed and said, these knights were but children compared to him. No man here could match me if I had come prepared for battle. I crave of this court only a Christmas pastime, since it is Yule and the New Year, and you are young and merry. And looking around, the Green Man said, if any of you are so bold or wild to dare strike one stroke for another with me, I will give him my axe to use as he pleases. If any man is fierce enough, let him come and take this axe and strike the first blow. I will stand the stroke from him without moving. But then he in turn must agree to stand up to one of my strokes come next New Year's Day. So come quickly, let's see now if any here dare reply. Well, the whole household was astonished by this challenge, and none would reply to it. The Green Man looked around at them all and rolled his eyes, but not one of them would rise. And then he coughed loudly and stretched himself haughtily and said, what? Is this Arthur's house that is spoken of throughout the land? Where is your fierce strength and fine boasting? All of your revels are overwhelmed by the word of one man. And then he laughed so loud that Arthur was angered, and the blood shot into his face for shame. And so he approached him and said, Marry, the madness you ask, and since 'tis madness you asked, and since you seek such folly, give me your axe, and I will give you the blessing you've begged to receive. And so the Green Man got down from his horse and calmly handed Arthur the axe. He stood a whole head and more taller than any other man in the hall there. With an impassive face, he pulled away his coat and hair to give Arthur a ready mark. But just then Gawain called out, my lord, allow me to take this match on. For it's not fitting that you should accept this challenge when there are so many of your knights here with you. Now, I'm aware that I might be the least of your knights, but pray let me give the stroke, for if I live not after this, I am less of a loss than you are. And besides, this foolish affair doesn't benefit you. Let me claim this adventure. And so King Arthur gave Gawain leave to take the stroke. Gawain took up the green axe and approached the Green Knight, who calmly awaited him. Before we begin, let me know your name, good knight. I entreat you to tell me truly so that I may trust your word. In good faith, I am called Gawain, who will give you this stroke, let be what may follow. And at this time next year, you will have your turn with me alone. And the Green Knight said, I am pleased, Sir Gawain, that this challenge has been taken by you. Now you must assure me on your honor that you'll seek me out, whether near or far. And Gawain answered, where shall I look for you? What is your name and where is your court? For I shall most certainly come to our appointed meeting. But the Green Knight said he'd tell Gawain where to find him after the stroke was struck. And so Gawain took the green axe in hand while the Green Knight prepared himself. He leaned over so his neck was bare. With a mighty swing, Gawain brought the axe flashing down and through his neck. And then his fair head fell from his neck and it went rolling under the table. Bright red blood flowed from the neck, but the man himself kept standing. And even worse, he walked over and reaching under the table, grabbed up his head by the hair. Quickly getting back on his horse, he settled himself in his saddle as if he had suffered no mishap. And he held his head in his outstretched hand, and he turned his torso around as if looking at them all. Stretching his head towards the queen and pulling up its eyelids, the head spoke. See that you get ready, Gawain, to go as you vowed, and faithfully seek me out as you've promised here before all these knights. Go to the Green Chapel on New Year's morning next, and there abide the blow you've earned. I am known as the Knight of the Green Chapel. Come, or be called a craven. And with a rude rush and roar, he turned his horse and hastened out of that hall with his head in his hand. Then Arthur, the High King, marveled in his heart at what had happened, but he showed no sign of it. Turning to the queen, he made light of it, saying it was indeed a cunning Christmas game. But now I can eat, as I have indeed seen a marvel. And calling Sir Gawain to me, said, come, hang up the axe, for it is hewn enough for this night. And so they hung the green axe behind the dais, so that they would all remember the adventure. And then those two lords sat down to supper, and amidst music and delight, they passed the night. And so Arthur began the new year with this example of brave vows and deeds. And if Gawain ever regretted the adventure, he didn't say anything. But as noble and brave as Gawain was, a year passes quickly when you are young. Yule passed into Lent, and winter gave way to spring, and life blossomed again. Summer came with soft breezes, but then the harvest hurried by, and soon winter came creeping back into the land. Finally at Hallowmass, Gawain made ready to depart. The knights and ladies were mournful, for no one expected him to return. Arrayed in all his armor with a pentacle signifying troth in golden thread on his shield and coat, he took his leave of them. And the pentacle spoke of his goodness and refinement, and the 5 virtues so close to his heart: free giving and friendliness, chastity and chivalry ever changeless, and piety surpassing all. And he thought to himself, what should I fear? What else can befall a man except that he should go to meet his destiny? So Gawain rode out of Camelot alone, proceeding northward through Wales and the wilderness in the winter. No one in the desolate countryside could point the way for him or tell him anything about the Green Chapel. The journey was long and hard, for he fought bandits and worms, wolves and trolls when he had to, and the cold was increasingly severe, so that Gawain was soon in great want and riding hopelessly astray. Finally, on Christmas Eve, wandering lost in an ancient forest, Gawain prayed to Christ and to Mary to guide him to shelter for this most holy night. And his prayers were answered. He unexpectedly saw through a stand of oak trees a marvelous castle, shimmering and shining in the cold moonlight. Coming out of the forest, he saw the castle surrounded by a moat and a park, and he gave thanks to God for his deliverance. When he came to the castle, he was welcomed most graciously. He was brought to the hall where a great fire blazed in the fireplace. There, the lord of the castle greeted Gawain kindly, inviting him to dwell there as long as he wished. Now, Gawain saw that the lord was big and bold, very large and long, and he was in the prime of life. He had a broad brown beard, a noble face, and his speech was frank and he carried himself like a fighter. And after Gawain was brought to his own chamber and bathed, he was given rich robes to wear. And then all of the people there had to agree that he seemed a prince beyond compare, for he looked like a vision of spring, both bright and beautiful with life. Together they were indeed a pair. After dinner, the Lord inquired tactfully about Gawain's purpose in his country, and Gawain told him that he belonged to Arthur's court. When the Lord heard that it was Sir Gawain who was to spend Christmas season at his court, he laughed aloud, so delighted was he. For in all the land of Britain, it was known that of all the knights of Arthur's court, Sir Gawain was held most high in honor and prowess and perfect manners. After dinner, the Lord and Gawain went to chapel to attend mass to celebrate their Lord's birth. And there it was that Gawain first saw the Lord's lady, who sat with another woman. When mass was ended and they returned to the hall, the lady and her companion came to greet Gawain. The lady was fairer in face, in her flesh and skin, her proportions and complexion, than all others, even Guinevere to Gawain's eyes. Her companion was her opposite, for she was ancient where the other was young, and hideous where the other was beautiful. But the old woman was held in high honor by all there. Now Gawain in his turn greeted the two women, bowing low to the old woman before kissing, as courtesy demanded, the younger in welcome. The women led him over to the fire to sit with him. And so, with the Lord commanding that the most fun he devised be at the Christmas feast, they made merry for the evening. Now the next day was full of happiness, for it was the day on which our Savior was born. And that day, and for two more, there was feasting and revelry in the hall. At each meal, marvelous dishes were served, good wine was drunk, and everyone had joy in each other. At the table, the ancient woman was seated highest, with the Lord sitting next to her. So Gawain found himself sitting next to the lady of the castle. And as people ate and drank and danced and played at Christmas games, Gawain and the fair lady took much pleasure in their companionship. Now soon it was time for the other guests to wend their way home, and Gawain also begged leave to depart. But the Lord of that manor took him aside and thanked him for the honor and pleasure of his presence during that high holy season, and begged him to stay longer with them. Then Gawain told him that by no means might he stay, for he had by his honor to continue on his way to keep an appointment on New Year's Day. And then he asked his host if he had ever heard of the Green Chapel and if he knew where it might be found, for he had only 3 days left to find the chapel and fulfill his vow. And I would rather fall down dead than fail in my errand. And then laughing, the Lord said, now definitely you must linger here, for when 'tis time for the tryst, I will teach you the road. Do not grieve over the Green Chapel, but stay in bed in my castle till New Year's morning. Then we'll set you on your way, for it is but 2 miles or so down from this hall. Then Gawain was delighted, and in gladness he laughed. Well, now, thank you. Thank you 1,000 times. Yes, now my quest is accomplished, so I can stay here a few more days and do what else you order. And then the Lord called to the ladies to come and make their guests merry. And the Lord himself was so full of mirth that he acted a bit crazy. He called out to Gawain, you have promised to do whatever deed I propose. Will you hold this behest here at this moment? Yes, certainly, sir, said that true knight. While I remain in your mansion, your command I'll obey. And so the Lord proposed a game. Gawain, who was still not fully recovered from his long journey, was to stay in bed as long as he wished, and then spend the day with the lady of the castle, while the Lord went out hunting every day. And they agreed good-naturedly on a pact. Whatever game should fall to the hunter during his day would belong to the guest. And in exchange, the host was to receive any booty Gawain might win while taking his ease at home. And so with much laughter and pleasure, they filled the night till it was time for bed, and they all departed. Before first daylight, the Lord set off with his hunters and his hounds, Amid the clamoring and trumpeting of a hunt, they flushed out many deer. Ever the hounds pursued them hotly. Ever the hunters let fly their barbed arrows, so that many deer brayed and bled and died. And that lord was wild with the joy of the hunt, and thus blissfully employed the day till dark of night. While the lord was at his game in the greenwood, Gawain lay in bed sleeping, but he awoke as he heard a soft sound at his door as it secretly opened. And peering out from the bed curtain, he saw his most lovely hostess draw near the bed. He was so surprised that he pretended he was sleeping, and when the lady came and sat on his bed, he wondered what to do. Finally, he thought it more seemly to act as if he was just waking up and finding her there. And so, slowly opening his eyes, he was greeted gracefully with delighted laughter. The lady jested that he was easily taken and now her prisoner. And just as gaily, Gawain surrendered. But when he begged her to leave until he was dressed, she refused, telling him that she intended to keep him abed while her husband was away. And after praising him for all his virtues, she then offered him her body to delight in. Now, Gawain humbly told her he wasn't worthy of such a gift, but the lady replied that she knew that many women would give up their lands and gold to have him in this place. That lady was an urgent wooer, that lady fair of face. The noble knight replied with pure speeches that she honored him too much. The lady demurred, if I had the choice of my own husband, I would choose you for your noble nature, your beauty and bounty and gay bearing. Gawain kindly said, I am proud of your praise and I will always be your servant. And so they spent the morning talking, he ever flawlessly courteous, until at last the lady desisted. For he knew he went to his death. There was no hope for it, and he would not dishonor her so. Finally, the lady asked leave to go, but before leaving, she asked him to kiss her. Gravely he agreed, as befitted a knight obeying his lady's command. And so she departed. When he was dressed, Gawain made his way to the hall, where he was entertained by the two ladies of worth, the youthful and the aged, until the Lord's return. And the Lord returned that night, and his men were heavily laden with the quarry. The animals were deposited on the floor of the hall in rows. And then with much merriment, the host presented them to Gawain. How does this play please you? Have I deserved praise? Have I earned by my art your heartiest thanks? Gawain praised the venison readily, for they were still fat and juicy. And so they continued the game, with the Lord presenting Gawain with his catch. And when Gawain graciously gave him the one thing of value he had gotten that day, a kiss. I would give it up gladly, even if it were greater, he said. When the Lord inquired where Gawain had gotten his prize, Gawain replied that that information was not part of the bargain. And laughingly, they sat down to supper. After supper, they merrily agreed to play the game again. And before all the courtiers, they drank their pledge to exchange their trophies, whatever prize their day should bring. And in the morning, the Lord and his hunters departed before dawn. To the marshes they went today, and soon the dogs were on a scent. And by a fen pool and a cliff, they came upon their quarry. A boar without rivals soon burst out upon them. He was aged and savage, huge and grim when he grunted. As he charged past the hunters, he flung 3 hounds to the ground and sprung off with great speed. And those hunters gave chase, and many times he turned at bay and mained the pack, who howled with dismay. The hunters shot him with arrows that hit the mark, but soon fell off his hardened hide. And when some arrows chanced to wound him, he turned in a frenzy and attacked once more and fled away, with that Lord chasing after till the day passed away. Now, back at the castle, our brave knight lay abed in luxury, and the lady came early to his side to wear away his will. He greeted her first, and she answered most eagerly and sat down softly by his side. And though once again she urgently begged him to love her, he gently refused, although he was tested to the breaking point, for she was lovely beyond measure. For with words kind and courteous, he skillfully turned aside her advances without hurting her pride. And so she departed, leaving with Gwaine 2 kisses. And getting dressed, Gwaine went to the hall and spent a delightful day with the 2 women. Now, the Lord and his men were hard pressed in their hunting, but at the end of the day, they brought that boar to bay. And the Lord himself brought the great beast down. And arriving late at the hall, he presented the boar's head to Gwaine with good cheer. And with equal cheer, Gwaine presented him with his winnings in exchange. 2 kisses he gave him on the spot. And then they were quit of their bargain for the night. And that night, once again, they feasted and made merry with carols and dancing. And the lady ever sat next to Gwaine and cast on him secret, sweet looks to charm him. And he was troubled by her longing, but could not in courtesy coldly refuse her. And so he graciously played the noble knight to her lady. Later that night, Gwaine told his host that he must depart in the morning to search out the Green Chapel to keep his pledged promise. But the Lord swore that Gwaine could leave on New Year's morn and arrive at the Green Chapel with time to spare. And he further insisted that Gwaine lie 1 more day in the castle while he went out to hunt, so that they might once again trade their gains. For I have tested thee twice, and trusty I find thee. Now 3rd time pays for all. So let us be merry while we may, and mindful of joy, for woe one may win whenever one wishes. And so they agreed that Gwaine would linger 1 day more, and soon after, all went to their beds. Once again, the Lord left in the morning with his hunters, and they rode across frosty fields as the sun arose, with rosy hues above the cloudy horizon. And the hunters let loose their dogs, who soon flushed out a fox. And all day long they followed that fox over field and through forests. He led them on such a merry chase. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the young knight slept on until that lady most fair came to his room to pursue her purpose. She came clad in a beautiful robe that showed her face and form to fair advantage, and going to the window, opened it wide and gaily called to him in his dark slumber, "Oh man, how could you sleep? The morning is so clear." And with it, from a heavy dream, he slowly surfaced, still befuddled by dark images of the doom that the next day would bring him when he went to the Green Chapel and received the deadly blow that was waiting for him. But seeing the comely lady at his side, he swiftly set aside his slumbers and greeted her gladly. And laughing sweetly, she bent and kissed his dear face. Then sweetly and merrily they spoke of bright and happy things, bringing Gwaine to the brink of great peril. For that queenly lady pressed him so close to the edge that he must either refuse her with offense or take her favors right there. Although he could be no less than courteous, still he would not betray his host. And so he turned all her advances sweetly aside. Now, that lady in despair asked if he had another lover, for Gwaine was known to be a mighty lover of women, for he was the knight of the goddess. But in truth, he admitted that he had none. And with a heavy heart, the lady made ready to depart, asking only another kiss. But when it was bestowed, she asked another boon. She pressed him to accept a ring of great worth to remember her by, but the noble knight knew that a ring was a pledge, and he was going beyond such things to his death tomorrow. So he had to refuse her once again. And in desperation, she pressed on him a small thing, a thing of no worth, yet worth much to her. She gave him her green girdle. Now, at first he wanted to refuse this token too, but she pressed it on him and gave him the telling stroke, for any who wore this cloth could never be harmed. The gallant knight took notice and thought in his heart that with this charm he might yet be saved from the perils of the Green Chapel. So when she pressed the belt most eagerly into his hands, he agreed to keep it and hide it from her husband when he returned that night. And with earnest thanks, he let her kiss him a 3rd time before she departed. Now, after seeking out the priest to confess his sins, both great and small, Gawain went to the hall and was more merry than he had ever been before. And nighttime came, and the Lord returned. He found Gawain in the hall with the ladies, and when the noble knight saw him, he swiftly went to meet him. And gaily greeting him, Gawain quickly bestowed on him his gains, namely 3 kisses, which he delivered as long and as deliciously as he had received them. And then the Lord declared, by Christ, you've come by a fortune in winning such wares, if they're worth what you paid. But the host could not equal such profit, for the whole day's hunt had yielded but 1 fox. And so their bargain was fulfilled. And that night they once more made merry with food and laughter and song. And when the time came to retire for the night, Gawain took leave of his host and the ladies with thanks on his part and great sorrow on theirs. And his host promised to send a man to guide him in the morning to the Green Chapel. And whether Gawain slept well that night, no one could say, for he had many things to think about. Now, New Year's Day dawned cold and snowy, but Gawain was already up and dressed. He had not forgotten his love token, but wrapped it around his waist. And getting on his horse, he looked back at the castle one last time and spoke his thanks for the hospitality he had received to God in heaven. And so he made his way with only 1 man over the drawbridge and into the forest. And when the man had led him to the Green Chapel, he begged Sir Gawain to depart and not go there, for he was sure to meet his death. But Gawain would keep his pledge, and so as the servant departed, he proceeded to the chapel. Now, the Green Chapel was no more than an old cavern overgrown with herbs and weeds with an evil look about it. And as Gawain set about exploring it, he heard a startling noise. How it clattered in the cliff as if someone was grinding a scythe upon a grindstone. How it whirred and rasped and rushed. But if the noise was meant to frighten Gawain, it only sparked his courage more. And he called out that he was here to keep his tryst. And the noise stopped for a moment, and a mighty voice called, stay, and you shall get in good time what I vowed to give you. And then the gruesome noise began again, as of a man sharpening an axe. And soon the giant knight appeared, still green of hue, holding the axe in his hand. Happy he was to see that Gawain was true and had kept his bargain. But then, without more ado, he bade Gawain to take his stance without a word of protest, just as he had met the blow Gawain had given him a year ago. And Gawain right willingly bent his neck and let the bare flesh appear without a sign of fear. Then the green man took up his axe full willingly, and with a mighty stroke he brought it down. But Gawain shrank back just a little with his shoulders, and the blade was jerked back. The Green Knight proudly taunted the prince for being a coward. But Gawain just as proudly told him to get on with it, for although he did flinch when the other had not, still the Green Knight knew that the blow would not cause his death. And Gawain had no such surety. For I will stand firm and stir not again till your axe has hit me. You have my word on it. The Green Knight again lifted his axe and with a mighty swing began to bring it down. But before he touched Gawain, he stopped the stroke. Gawain had not moved, but stood as still as stone. Now I like you thus, and so I will deliver the blow. And Gawain angrily told him, get on with it. And so for a 3rd time, the giant knight brought down his axe, but the swing was misplaced and only nicked Gawain's neck, leaving a tiny streak of blood. And Gawain, having felt the stroke, leapt aside and grabbed his weapons, prepared to fight. I have withstood you. 1 stroke was the pledge and no more. But the Green Knight was smiling, calmly leaning on his axe. Do not be so fierce, for you have received the blow you deserved. I shall do nothing more to hurt you. Twice I checked myself. Those strokes were harmless because twice you kept your pledge to me and gave me back the kisses you accepted from my wife. The 3rd time, though, you failed, and so I marked you with my axe. The green girdle you are wearing belongs to me. It was made by my wife for me. It was I who sent her to you with her kisses and her temptations to test you. I know everything that came to pass. And I have to say, amongst the knights of this world, Sir Gawain is like a pearl amongst white peas. You failed just a little when you were put to trial for the third time, not, however, out of lust for self-indulgence, because you loved your life and felt unhappy to lose it. But Gawain, on hearing the giant speak so, flushed with shame. Curses on the two of you, for fear and desire destroy all valor and virtue. And taking off the girdle, he tried to give it back, but the Green Knight refused to take it, bidding him keep the green lace as a gift and a remembrance. Although the young knight would not be comforted, he agreed to keep it as a token of his fault and his failure. Nor would he return with the knight to his castle to continue their revels, although the Lord pressed him, saying, "My wife, I know, we soon will make your friend, who was your bitter foe." But at Gawain's request, he told him that his name was Bertilac de Haute Desert, and he had been enchanted and changed in color by the might of Morgan le Fay, she who was called Morgan the Goddess. She made him go in this disguise to Arthur's court to put its pride to the proof, as well as deprive them of all their wits, especially Guinevere she wanted to hurt, hoping she might die of horror when the gruesome head spoke. She it is that is at home, that ancient lady. She's indeed your own aunt, Arthur's half-sister. Therefore, once again, I urge you to return and greet your aunt and make merry in my hall, for we all wish you well for your great loyalty. But Gawain would not return with him and bid his host farewell and made his long, slow way back to Camelot. And when he finally arrived, he was greeted with joy by one and all. But he was ashamed at his lack of honor in keeping the lady's token. So he wore it on his arm as a sign of his dishonor. But his friends would not berate him for his folly. And so King Arthur made it a law that all the ladies and knights of the Round Table would wear a token of green in honor of Gawain's adventure. And here ends the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And I say to all of you from Mama Cat, good night and sweet dreams.